In this video we're going to talk about constructor overloading. Now we've talked about constructors previously, but we can have multiple constructors in a class, and we call that constructor overloading. So if there's more than one constructor in a class, we refer to that as constructor overloading. Now there are a couple of rules that we must follow if we're going to overload constructors. Every constructor must have either a different number of parameters or different parameter types. So you can see in this example here, public student, no parameters. Public student, 2 strings. Public student, 2 strings and an int. That's fine. I could also have public student and have a string and an int as the parameters. That would be okay because this one would take 2 strings. So if I had another one that took a string and an int, that would be okay because they have different parameter types. They have the same number, but they have different parameter types. So the rules are, if we have the same number of parameters, the parameters must be different. If we have the same parameters, we must have a different number of parameters. And we can have a quick look at this. I have a class called student, and you can see here's my student constructor. Here is my student constructor that takes a name and an int, and here's my student constructor that takes a name, an int, a string and another string. And I could declare a fourth one. Let's say I went, okay, you can see it's complaining now because 2 strings, even if this was named differently, string degree, it wouldn't matter because I've got this one takes 2 strings and this one takes 2 strings. If you think about it, when I call a constructor and I pass it 2 strings, or sorry, I should say a string and an int and a string and an int. When I call a constructor that has a string and an int, which one would it be for? Just because this one's for the degree and this one's for the name doesn't mean anything. It wouldn't know which constructor you're calling when you call the constructor and pass a string and an int. But if this one was to take a string name and a string degree, that would be fine as well. This one takes, these both have 2 parameters, but this one takes a string and an integer, this one takes a string and a string. So Java can differentiate them. It just can't differentiate them when you have 2 constructors that have the same number and same type of parameters. So long as you either have a different number of parameters or different parameter types, you're fine having more than one constructor. Now one thing I should mention, let me just compile this and we can see here when I try to create a new student, that's fine, I have my 4 constructors. Now one thing to note with constructors is if you don't provide a constructor, Java will create one for you, because if you don't have a constructor you can't create an object. So in the case that I don't create a constructor, if I was to compile that now, look, there is one there. Java creates one for me, and the one that it creates would look just like this. It's the default constructor. It doesn't initialize anything, but it needs that to be able to create an object. So if you don't create a constructor, one will be created for you. If you create multiple constructors, then you have multiple ways to create the object. But as soon as you create a constructor, one is not created for you. And I'll show you what I mean. Let's get rid of the default one, and let's get rid of these 2 here, and let's compile that. If you have a look now, so I've got one constructor that takes a name and an age. There my constructor is. So now I don't have a default one. So if you want a default one, if you've already created another one, you need to create it yourself. If you don't create any constructors for you, Java will create a default constructor and it will look just like that.